teaching graduate courses, and conducting practical research to solve classroom problems. She's involved in international engagement work as well. Her varied programs include career pathways in agriculture for community college students and licensure in education for agricultural professionals. She serves as the lead coordinator. Her undergraduate and graduate courses include experiential learning in agriculture, occupation experience in agriculture, and scientific inquiry in agricultural and extension education, among others. Her various lines of research in teacher education, teacher professional development, and early career teacher support have been strongly represented in the Journal of Agricultural Education. She earned the BS and MS in agricultural education from NC State, and her PhD was earned in agricultural education, teacher education from the University of Missouri. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Misty Lambert.
Yes, we've got a couple of tech things we're trying to solve at the moment. So if I advance here in the classroom, it does not appear to be moving forward on the Zooms.
And then the other issue is, are we recording?
We are.
Okay,
It is recording.
So do you want to take a break and load your slides on this machine? Would that work for you?
I can do that. I mean, because I don't think they can see this. Okay. Yes, we'll take a quick time out and move. Okay, stop sharing. It's gonna have to
So I'm logged in as myself.
okay. Sorry, guys, we thought we had it figured out. It looked right.
do you have the presentation? Is that the presentation behind you though? Like
Yes.
behind that screen? Oh, okay.
I mean, let's see. I think it's a couple minutes to drive. Yeah. Oh, really? I was here super early, so this would work. That's laid plans.
Exactly. Okay. That worked?
Do authenticate.
Oh.
Good to go. I just need to share my screen in those folks, right? Wherever that went. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, good to go. Okay, perfect. Sorry, we thought we were in sync and only part of you were going to see the slides move. So as Dr. Johnson said, I'm Misty Lambert, and I just wanted to start by telling you a little bit about me. I know Ben gave a full Marvel origin story during his seminar, but I just had a few pieces that I think kind of paint the picture of how my journey got me to where I am. And so this is little Misty, right? And I'm first generation college student. And I think people sort of underestimate that when I say it. I'm super, super first generation. So my grandmother finished 8th grade. My dad was already married by the time he graduated high school. It was an event when, by the way, that's Misty with a mullet before mullets were cool. I came home in about the 2nd grade and told my parents I wanted to go to college. And they said, well, that's really cool. Figure out how you would pay for that, because there's There's no college fund. There's no plan for that. Nobody's ever done that. We don't know how to help you with that. Very supportive of the fact that I wanted to do it. They just didn't know how to assist me with that. So that really led me to finding agricultural education and FFA. I was lucky enough to go to a high school, South Rowan High School, that had a school farm. I'm a suburban kid, so I did not have an ag background. And I discovered this through a school that had a barn and chickens, as you can see here, but also a putting green and greenhouses and tractors and all the things to expose me to agriculture. I kind of thought before that I wanted to teach, but I didn't know agriculture was a thing you could teach until I got exposed to agricultural education. So that was really a sort of life-changing experience for me, and quite honestly paved the way for a teaching fellow scholarship, a Coca-Cola scholarship, and a full ride to NC State. And so that pathway had me running as a state FFA officer in North Carolina, being an FFA advisor and teaching high school here in North Carolina. So very sort of traditional ag education experiences before, well, by year 2 of teaching agriculture, I had had my first back surgery and they told me another one was coming. And so it's a pretty physical job. I think there's some people who can do it without the physical labor. I was not one of those. We're doing fruit sales and Christmas tree sales and all the things. So I had made the decision to go to graduate school and continue giving back to this profession, but not be in the classroom anymore. And I thought that would save me a little bit, but no. I ended up having my spine fused 8 weeks into my PhD program. So I literally just moved across the country. I went to the University of Missouri. This is about 2 weeks before I ended up having a spinal fusion. I was 900 miles from family, from friends, and had really, thankfully, found a community of people at the University of Missouri that took me in. So it was a very unexpected doctoral journey. I had told students this in my research methods class. I really thought I'd go to grad school and I would do the research enough to get the degree, but I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach at a university. I wanted to teach teachers. It was what I was already good at. So I was going to tolerate the research, but I was there for the teaching, and that all changed when I met my mentor. So Dr. Bobby Torres, who is now department head at the University of Arizona, was my research advisor at the University of Missouri and opened my eyes to a whole world of research and took a very practical approach to applied classroom research that solves problems for teachers. As Dr. Donaldson mentioned, my pathway is 2 degrees from NC State, a PhD from the University of Missouri, spent 7 years at Oregon State, 3 years at Iowa State, and I'm in my 3rd year here at NC State, again as an alum.
I cannot see your slides advancing. So,
What?
yeah.
Okay.
Just like that.
Yes. We don't know why. Anyone know why? Anyone have a guess? Did I do something strange? Y'all are seeing them move, yes?
Yes, we are seeing them move here. But
All right, I'm
maybe
frustrated.
try sharing again and then.
Mhm.
Try from the wall side instead of PowerPoint.
Don't know. Maybe that error is the issue.
Sorry.
Just a touch frustrated. We really thought we had this figured out.
All right, well, let me see.
See if they're moving for the online folks.
Oh, it looks like it's.
Yes.
Okay, this is what I can see. Okay, yes.
Okay.
So it's me working now. Okay, I'm in the Zoom too, so.
Yes. Okay, progress.
Yep, there we go. That works.
Okay, perfect. So a little bit about some research that I've done. I do have in the middle of going through the PNT process, so I've just recently counted all these things, 16 articles that are published, 4 that are currently in review by different journals, 48 different manuscripts that have been presented at conferences, and 19 different posters. But I feel like the real pieces that I'm excited about for my research are the different sort of multi-institutional collaborations, the different graduate students have been able to work with, and the fact that our research has been time and time again recognized for its impact on the profession. And so if I had to put forward some guiding principles for how I guide my research, one would be to build and contribute to collaborative research teams. That's priority for me. I want graduate students to be a part of the process. I want to collaborate with colleagues. I feel very strongly that research is not an isolated event, particularly educational research is better when there are more people at the table. I do feel like practical research problems much more speak to me than theoretical pieces. I like to identify problems teachers are having and come up with really practical solutions. And I would like to do high quality research. So those are sort of my guiding pieces. So if we think about how I put all of this together, I know there are folks who could spend their whole career studying one very isolated piece of information. And that's not a problem, right? If I think about, let's say, studying families, right? There are 123 million families in the US. If we think about the number of ag teachers there are in the US, it's about 12,000. So there's lots of different problems that are happening across that group, but they tend to be a very small population in comparison to some other things that are potentially researched in this department. And so if we think about a student going from high school, being recruited into some kind of teacher prep program, or even just getting hired straight into a career as an educator, there's this phase where they're sort of mentored or inducted into the profession, and we hope to retain them across their career. My sort of sweet spot is kind of right here. Sort of the end of teacher preparation, the early part of their career, as we're looking at what we do to mentor, induct, to on-the-job train those who are coming with no real educational prep program behind them, so that we can set them up for a longer career. And so as I put different pieces together, looking across practical research problems, these are just some of the topics that have been top of mind for me as I've engaged in research. So it's really a matter of, for me, coming up with a question and then trying to solve that question, trying to figure out what the solution is. So, you can imagine me, for those of you who thought bubble over my head. We're working in this mentor program. So what factors are really impacting the satisfaction of these folks? And so we were trying to figure out if your mentor is more similar to you or very different than you, is there something in that relationship that we could do in pairing you up with another teacher that would help you be more satisfied with that relationship? So we had them take a style indicator. We looked at their satisfaction, and quite honestly, the answer was all proteges were satisfied. All of them. They just wanted help. They did not care if that person was similar to them, different than them. Just somebody reaching out and offering help was enough for them. Mentors were more satisfied if they were more similar to the person they were working with. And we did get about 10% of them who said if they were going to do it again, they might pick a different mentor, because the way of those were assigned, there's a fairly limited list of folks they could pick from. But we realized that style was not really a factor in that relationship. So mentoring comes up for me again a few years later when I'm running a leadership program, helping to get a leadership academy started at Oregon State University. We're pairing up college students with mentors and really trying to figure out that relationship and what's happening and what we could do to better facilitate that relationship. And what we found was, of all of our relationships, if we think about this idea of, is it really being effective for them as a relationship? And is that person sort of personally invested in getting them to their goals? Of all the people we assessed in that program that year, only 5 of them really had a robust relationship. We had an equal amount that were ineffective. They were not really relationally connected. They were not really motivated to achieve those goals. We had a couple, 8 here that you can see that were, in our minds, not exactly maximized mentor relationships either. There were some that had just turned into a friend relationship, right? They're really relational with each other, but not really pushing the mentee, that college student, towards their goals, just friend on campus to go have coffee with, which was great. They were okay with that. It just was not everything they were looking for. Others who we categorized as stimulators, they were really goal-driven, but not personally invested in that relationship with the student. So they would have very formal meetings, check-ins on their goals, but not necessarily relational in a way that the student might have wanted. And so trying to figure out things we could do to get to that more robust relationship, questions we could ask, ways we should facilitate early friend making, ways we could guide when those goals needed to come into the conversation to really make that a much stronger relationship. We spend a ton of time in teacher education doing these feedback conferences, right? We go to watch them student teach and have feedback conferences. We watch them micro teach and have feedback conferences. The goal being that you create teachers who can solve their own problems, who are reflective, who can teach a lesson and say, that worked really well. That didn't work at all. If I was going to do it again, I would do X differently. We think that's what we're doing, but we didn't have a whole lot of data on that. And so this is really one of the first problems that I identified with as a teacher, a classroom teacher, because I felt like I was really prepared coming out of NC State to go into the classroom. And that first day, the door slams shut and the bell rings, and you were the only one in that room. And no one, up until that point, every time I talked, people had things to speak into that. Faculty were talking into that, cooperating teachers were speaking into my teaching. Everybody was vested in making that better, but not at that point. I was in a classroom, I was a first year teacher, I was a first year, first day teacher, and no one was there. So I'm thinking about my problems and I'm like, okay, I've got a list of things that, administrator comes to visit, or I'll talk with my mentor. Weeks went by with no feedback, no interaction, and I just felt a little stuck. And I do think they had tried to create a reflective teacher, but I was kind of stumped as to why that was not happening for me. And then when I transitioned to this role, seeing students in the exact same boat by the end of student teaching still could not really solve their problems on their own, which meant they were going to be in the exact same boat as me. And so thinking about this idea of we have to meet students where they are, the reflection that they can get to while they're student teaching or early in their career is very technical. They can maybe tell you what happened during class, but they definitely need time to develop reflective ability. There's all sorts of data that says more like 10,000 hours of things to become a real expert. And so we're asking them to make connections to information they do not have. They don't have experiences to draw from. And so we're really pushing them towards a goal that's probably not achievable that early in their career. The other thing we know is when they reflect, they desire a response. They want somebody speaking into that. So reflective journals just into the void or into the abyss are not really accomplishing anything. That's the same idea as me as a first year teacher in my classroom all alone going, that didn't work. I thought that would work. It worked with first period, but it didn't work with third. And I wonder why that is. And if I don't have an answer, I don't have other experiences to share from, I don't have someone speaking into that, it's just reflection into the void. And so we think we're building reflective thinkers, but they're not ready for that. My favorite study I've done so far is how do early career ag teachers talk about their time? We took a group of teachers in years 1 through 5 and just talked to them about how their time is allocated, how they perceive time. They very clearly spoke about their day as patterns. And you can imagine teacher's day has a very routine pattern to every day, every class period, every 10 minutes is like this. They were making very conscious allocations of where they were spending their time. But a couple of pieces that we did learn from this, there was a real evolution of time management for these teachers. The early career, the earliest of these early career folks, year 1, were just spending time on lesson planning, grading. I mean, you can imagine kind of class was all consuming for them. It was not till years 3, 4, 5 that they're really making choices about the things that sort of, to use a Donaldsonism, the things that amplify them, the things that they wanted to be doing in the program, the teams that they wanted to be coaching, the places they wanted to take students to visit, the field trips they were really excited about engaging students with. They were just not in a space to think of that in the first couple of years. They all talked about fitting their personal time around their work, not vice versa. And there was a tension between what they wanted from their job and what was actually happening in all cases across all years. This is what I would want to do, but I can't. So time really started this first conversation for me about, are they stressed out about that, right? So there's this tension between what they do. And so is that creating job stress? Is that really weighing on them? And so we looked at using an instrument called the Job Stress Survey and looked at all of our beginning teachers. And the good news was they were not stressed. They were pretty good managers of their time, which I'm not surprised by. Part of their day is managed for them, right? Students show up when the bell says they're going to show up. So there are things that were pretty well managed for them, and it's got a lot of built-in accountability. If you're telling students there's going to be an exam, you have to get an exam built. So they're really keeping up with their requirements. The more confident they were in their ability to manage their job, there was sort of less job pressure. So it really did, in some ways, come down to that idea of self-efficacy. But we wanted to go further with that. So we wanted to look at ag teachers. Are they stressed? Are they equally stressed in all states? And across the board, they were below what the job stress survey says is stress. Like the threshold there is the top of that black bar. And in all cases, job stress, lack of support, they were below the threshold of what would be called job stress. However, that middle one, we're pretty close to where the threshold is. And that was a category called job pressure. So they felt pretty supported. There was some stress there, but it was not to the point that that our general data would tell us that they are stressed. But there was a lot of pressure on their job. And when we look at the things that were putting pressure on teachers, I don't know that much of this would be really novel, but it had not been quantified in our literature before. If you talk to anyone who has taught agriculture, the things where our teachers were well above the norm data, paperwork, overtime, deadlines are the top three by far. And this idea of work consuming their personal time are really where they're much more off the chart. They do make a lot of decisions, more decisions than some other jobs. And coworkers and lack of equipment, those kinds of things were also slightly stressful, but you can see where the big difference is there. And this included people in our norm data, included people in all sorts of jobs like police officers and nurses and things that you might think would have some stress to them. And our teachers were pretty stressed out about paperwork and the number of hours they were working. And so if I know some things about those teachers, can I predict if they're more or less stressed? Turns out, yes. And the ones that really shook out, let's see what we think would happen. Who do we think is more stressed? Males or females? Women. Okay. Who do we think is more stressed? Teachers with less experience or more experience? Less. Teachers with less experience are more stressed. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. All right. What about hours they spend at work? The more hours you spend at work, are you more stressed or less stressed? Right? We think yes. And so we know female stress level was higher. The more hours they were spending at work a week, the more stressed out they were. And the more years of experience they got, the more they were able to put that into some perspective and manage their stress levels. I think some of that you have more of an arsenal, right? The further we get into this, we know some things from other studies. The more they knew how to manage their time, the less time they were spending planning lessons. They get into the routine of the year. So there are lots of reasons why that gets better. But this tells us some things about as we plan in service, as we plan teacher sessions for those lateral entry folks. The work I do right now, Dr. Donaldson mentioned with the Delta program and with LEAP, almost everyone we're seeing come in right now that I'm seeing are female with almost no years of experience walking into the classroom to take a full-time job while also then needing to complete the coursework. So just looking at this, what we know about teacher stress can tell us where they're at. We got really interested after a failed cooperating teacher pairing in what made a good cooperating teacher. And so we went after data from across multiple states, Missouri, North Carolina, Oregon, Texas, and did a Delphi. What makes a good cooperating teacher? And I don't know that much of this was a surprise. It has spawned some research for us in how we find the people who show these characteristics within our teaching population. And we were surprised about some things that did not surface into these categories. But yeah, we have a program in Oregon that was a piece of a national program, the Delta program. And we wanted to see what was happening during that conference. We did find out that the longer PD that we could get, the better, and that supports some research. This was a week-long training, which was fabulous. They were at a hotel, they were away from school, they were away from family obligations, they were immersed in professional development, and they still had trouble being fully present, right? They're stepping out in the hallway to answer questions about the fair week. But we did find out from this that the more we can immerse people into professional development to get them away from sight, these were teachers choosing to do this for the week in their summer. So we know they're a little bit of a skewed population. They were intrinsically motivated to be there, but even that group had trouble just engaging and improving themselves in their teaching. And so as we think about professional development, we really have tried to collect some data about how we tailor that to their experience levels. What do they need at each of these levels? There are definitely times where I feel like as a teacher educator, we decide what it is they need professional development on. And I think there's absolutely room for that. But if we ask them what they need help on, our young teachers were definitely similar to our non-new teachers in needing help with balancing priorities. But then there's some really significant differences in things like teaching ag mechanics. And at the time, there's a backstory there. At the time, Oregon State had stopped teaching agricultural mechanics at the undergrad level, but had not stopped teaching it at the high school level. So these folks were graduating with zero mechanics experience. So while our more experienced teachers definitely had that, our young teachers were screaming for it. Like, if we're not getting it in our teacher prep program, then we got to get it in service. It has to happen somewhere. So that need popped really quickly. But you can see the differences between the groups, right? Our younger folks were better at teaching agri-science. They were much more equipped to integrate science into agriculture than our older teachers. And so thinking about how we divide up that professional development. As Common Core came down the pike, we looked at what teachers needed, how familiar were they, what professional development needs did they have, because it was a really sort of scary term for ag teachers to be required to be part of the school's plan to implement Common Core when they didn't really understand it. But most of them just weren't familiar with it. They were hearing media attention around Common Core. They did feel like they needed some additional training to be able to support their students in math and writing, but thought overall, once they got familiar with it and we talked about what it was, they're like, oh yeah, this would make me a better teacher, which we agreed with. As I was getting hired, we looked at a number of pieces about case research, and I'm going to skip over a couple of these in the interest of time because we did use up a little bit there at the beginning. But really what happened is I was in Oregon at a time where Oregon was on the bleeding edge of adopting case curriculum. It's a national curriculum for ag science education in a state that did not have a state curriculum. And so school districts were buying in. They're sending every teacher to case training. They're getting all of these folks case equipment. The idea being that students were doing inquiry-based learning. They were conducting labs, they're learning on their own. It's fabulous. So we had lots of questions about this. Does going to that institute make them more efficacious in teaching science as they're immersed in this 2-week-long case training institute? We wanted to know how the teachers were experiencing that, like how did they talk about it? And so we definitely learned lots of things from this. What did students experience? And it definitely served different students differently. Ironically, the sort of A Students were frustrated because there were multiple right answers to things, right? Welcome to science. Where other students were really excited by the inquiry approach who had not really enjoyed class before. But it did present a challenge for those for whom English was a second language because it was very student driven. You had to read the instructions, follow the lab. And so it had a lot of scientific vocabulary. So some students struggled with that. And so as we took all of the information we gathered from CASE about how teachers experience it, how students experience it, we published all of that and started having conversations about CASE. It really prompted some pretty significant changes in the CASE curriculum to, I think, better serve students. They integrated more ways to teach vocabulary, more literacy pieces for those students who were less well served. We heard from almost every teacher who tried to implement it that there was way too much in it. It planned for 135 days of curriculum. And they were like, that's great, but we also have homecoming and yearbook day. We also have greenhouses to run. Like there are other things happening in the program, so we cannot cover all of that. And if they have to get it addressed in level 1 to be able to do the content in level 2, they're not going to be ready. And so CASE cut that down significantly. And so it's one of those places where we were excited that what happened, the teacher's experience was heard, responded to, and quite honestly, those on the bleeding edge really did make CASE much better for everyone who followed behind them. We did look at, I had a graduate student in Oregon who came from California, and every student in an ag ed program in California is an FFA member. But he knew from teaching that things were different. He just couldn't really quantify what that difference was. Why are some students, if the field is leveled, every student who walks through the door gets an opportunity to be in FFA, why does that experience look differently? And in particular, he focused on the difference between rural and urban Latinx students. And one of the things he learned was, even though they were all members, the opportunities look very different. And students basically coined the term rural privilege in this study. Those students who had land, who had animals, who came from the more rural areas, had an opportunity to do supervised agricultural experiences and earn degrees. And the students from the more urban areas with apartments and did not have access to those things felt like they were limited right out of the gate from being able to do many of the things that FFA opportunities would present to them. And so they really were some of the first we were hearing in the literature saying, SAE is just not serving all of these students equally. There's just no way for them to do it, which has now sort of trickled down to the SAE for all component that Jillian and I are currently investigating. We're in the middle of putting some abstracts forward for Southern region. I would be remiss if these are just future questions, so I'm happy to come back to these when we get to questions, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the work I've been doing with PHLIL. So that is the Post-Harvest Loss Institute. This is a group, so if you think about maize in particular, the work I focus on this slide is what we've been doing in Ghana, but the project has been working in Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Guatemala, and Ghana since 2013. So there's a lot of things I could talk about that have been happening here, but more than a third, at least a third, they think, of the grain is lost after harvest. So we've already gone through production, we've grown the food, and now we're losing it. And this blows my mind every time I say it. Sub-Saharan African grain post-harvest loss, so the amount lost after it's already produced, is greater than all of the global food aid the USA gives the world. So there is a ton of post-harvest loss. Not to mention, so some of it's lost completely, right? So let's say a rat eats it, right? It's gone. And some of it is just the quality is lost. So you get insects in there that eat the protein of a kernel. And so the nutritional piece of the grain is not there, which could affect, if you're feeding it to your family or your children, can affect child development. And if you're feeding it to your poultry, it affects the quality of the meats and it affects the egg quality. So it's throughout the value chain. So this is an $8 million multinational, multi-institutional disciplinary team. Our work in Ghana is just what I'll focus on to try to break off a piece of this. What you see here, this is traditional, one of the traditional storage options. we're seeing less and less of that as we were out. There's still some that are storing it in things like corn cribs or more traditional clay storage. What we're seeing more often are what you would hear called PP bags, which is just polypropylene. It's just a plastic bag. And one of the pieces of hermetic technology that is being pushed by the entomologists on our team and that we're working with the economists to work through value chain and supply chain issues is this idea of hermetic storage. So these are hermetic storage bags. This particular one is a zero fly hermetic bag. The ones you see in the picture here, these are PICS bags out of Purdue. But what you'll notice in this middle picture down here at the bottom is every couple of bags here is a PICS bag. The others are traditional. If you look around the bottom of those, you can see where insects have been in the bag. So hermetic bags, what they do is they really reduce gas exchange, and they're infused with, it's a multi-layer bag, and one of the layers is infused with a pesticide that will keep insects out of the bag. So it's basically a grain silo in miniature. It does what we do in silo storage in the US in these very small 100 kg bags to keep grain after harvest. And so this team has, like I said, entomologists. It also has agricultural engineers. There are folks building moisture meters because it doesn't matter if the bag is really good if you put your grain in there too wet, so you have to dry it properly. Education teams, which is what we did, which is where the idea of this experiment came from, because it's hard to explain if the grain is still technically there, but it's not as good. So one of the things we did as an education team is we would go into areas, we would hold trainings for extension agents, we would put grain in a PP bag, and we would put grain in a zero fly or a hermetic bag, and we write the date on it that they could open it. And once they opened those bags, you could weigh the difference, you could feel the difference, but you could absolutely see the grain quality difference. And so we taught them how to use the hermetic storage bags, how to tie them properly. We would give them that bag, which for some folks was really a big deal because the bag is reusable. But we would also really educate them what's happening to their grain when it was in storage and how easily and affordably being a relative term, but how affordably they could hold on to more of that grain. We also engaged youth entrepreneurs, we engaged women. So it's a really multidisciplinary team that's been working with PHLAL. And then we're just getting started with our career pathways in ag and community colleges. This is a collaboration with Dr. Donaldson, funded by the Ag Foundation, where we're looking at pathways for community college students and some research coming out of that right now with Gabby Worley. So I'm going to stop there so I have a chance to address some questions. Apologies for all the tech issues today, putting us a little behind, but I'm excited to have you all here. What can I answer? Joseph?
Dr. Lambert,
Yes. Yes.
I have one question.
Okay.
And that is, does the post-harvest laws focus on corn, or are there cowpeas in any of those countries?
That's a great question. So some of those bags were, the one I showed you there was a cowpea bag, which is black-eyed peas, or how Americans would know that. It's a legume. Yeah, so the commodity definitely ranged based on where we are. In Bangladesh, we were largely working with rice. Ethiopia, we worked with a couple of different commodities, maize being one, but we also worked with cowpeas would be part of it, soybeans, some of the work in, we've transitioned from this team that's no longer post-harvest loss funded by the USAID in areas like Malawi are starting to look at cocoa and coffee, like higher priced commodities. And so the commodities definitely range. There were about 10 different commodities we were looking at ways to dry and store in Ethiopia, because there are many more smallholder subsistence farmers there and looking at how to store that. That work was, it's interesting. One of the pieces I learned quickest through the USAID work is how challenging it is to work in some of these areas. And not because not because of the people, not because of the terrain, but because it is a complex government program. It is. We were working in Guatemala in 2016 when the presidential office turned over in the US and all money to South America, Central America stopped. And it was the basic statement they gave to USAID was, when you stop immigration, we'll give you the money back. And we're like, we need the money so there's food there. So like, but it was immediate. It just stopped. Ethiopia had a civil war basically in the last little bit in the north, to the point that the project PI from the university there is currently still in California. Left the area. So it is a challenging problem to address post-harvest loss, but addressing it in sort of bureaucratic conditions, war-like challenges, famine happening right now, really just amplify the challenges of working in some of these environments. But it's been a tremendous learning experience. The people are eager to learn. The supply chain issues can be navigated. There are lots of young folks there interested in what we're doing. Unemployment, particularly in Ghana, is really high. So there are lots of people who could enter the workforce and be doing things, but there are just a number of barriers to navigate around to get that moving.
I have a couple questions from
Sure.
folks virtually. So the first is from Regina Mosley, who's
Yes.
a master's student in our program,
Yes.
and also a family resource agent.
Regina in class.
Yeah,
Yep.
and Regina would like to know, which is exactly my question, Regina. The teacher study was very interesting. Have you thought of doing this type of study with extension staff? I
Ooh.
can see how this would be very beneficial to new agents. And I was thinking as I saw your slides pop up.
Yeah, really?
Hot differences in competencies and what they need.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think the instrument would translate. Happy to share it with Virginia. She'd like to collect some data and design a study in that direction. But yeah, so those were calculated through what we call mean weighted discrepancy scores, which is really you just ask somebody, how much do you know about this thing? And how important is it that you know about this thing, right? Because I might not know anything about ag mechanics, but if I'm not teaching ag mechanics, I don't need to know. Or I might not know anything about cowpea production, but if we don't do that in my country, then it's not important. Or it might be really important, but I also already know everything I need to know. So then that's not an area where we need to tackle professional development. So we're really looking for that number you saw, the mean weighted discrepancy score, is really where the biggest gap is between what they need to know, what's important, and what they don't know, how competent they are in those things. So happy to share that instrument if anybody would like it, but that's how you get to not just what do you want to learn, what's interesting, what should you be learning, because sometimes we just identify, oh, they don't know a lot about this. Yeah, but they don't really need it. That's not where the need is. So yeah.
Well, and
Yeah, you're
so
good.
Kimberly Cheatham, another one of our graduate students,
Sure.
is asking, what were some of the research questions asked of the students who received mentoring from the faculty advisors in their mentoring project?
Yeah. What were some of the questions asked of students? Did I get that? Okay. Yeah, for sure. So the way that program is structured, it's a leadership academy at Oregon State University that we started while I was there. Still really proud of that. The program has boomed since we started it. Students come in with their own ideas of what their goals are. Part of what we do is help them set those goals, but they come in with that. So we pair them up with mentors, and some of the things they do in those conversations is assess progress, figure out what their barriers are along the way. We facilitate book clubs, so they're reading the same things. So there's some things they can talk about from usually, I don't know if you would call it necessarily self-help books. There's a library of options, and the two of them together can choose what they would read and what would make progress. But some of them are personal development, some of them are particular kind of business and industry or employability skills based. Others are really self-awareness, while the last group is sort of an awareness or a literacy of others in the world around you. So it's really what they identify as those targets. And then as they meet regularly, it's progress on those goals, but also as they're achieving them, setting new goals. So yeah. Yeah.
That's all the online.
Okay, perfect.
Kimberly.
Uh-huh.
Regina.
Just trying to make sure I got my attendance list. Yes, you got it.
What additional questions do you have for Dr. Lambert?
I think I got them all in the chat.
Yeah.
If there are no additional questions, I want to say thank you very much, Dr. Lambert, for
Sure.
sharing with us today. Let's give her a round of applause for sharing her research. Thank you all again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Agricultural and Human Sciences Fall Seminar. Have a great week, everybody.